Welcome back to those of you who were traveling, and hope everybody had a good, somewhat relaxing break. I had a little bit of story to tell, not about the break, but I have gotten to the point now where I don't make any assumptions about what I'm going to be doing over a break. Like you'll hear a lot of instructors saying, "I'm just going to get caught up on work." I've done that twice in a row, and it did not end well either time. So Christmas break. For context, my last spring 2025 was the busiest semester I'd ever had. I taught four different courses, and then one of them was brand new. Plus, I was teaching two online sections, so it was effectively six classes. And over Christmas break, I told my family, I said, "Look, I'm going to be really busy. I can do nothing but work. Please delete me out of all the planning. I will do whatever you want. I'll show up for any events you want, but I don't want to have any drama or anything like that." And they said, "Okay, we'll take care of everything." Then 2 days into my Christmas break, my mother got pneumonia, and she spent 3 days in the hospital. So that was a sign, but it doesn't stop there. So spring break, we're in the middle of the spring semester, and I say I'm going to take at least a few days off because my brother was coming to visit me in Kirksville, and we were going to hang out. And I say I take a few days off to kind of rest and relax, and then I'll get back at it. And you're probably thinking, well, your brother probably got sick, right? It says, no, actually, I got sick. Like we're talking like deathly ill, like lying in bed moaning about the end of the world type sick. So that's been a sign. If ever I plan that I'm going to get a lot of work done, that's just a really, really bad idea. I should plan on getting zero work done. Now, I'm not saying that you should take my approach to anything, but you do need to leave yourself a little bit of time for yourself and make sure that you have a little bit of a little bit of a break, because if you plan on just doing nothing but work, your body's going to tell you, or fate's going to tell you, yeah, it's not going to work out the way you want it to. All right, so before we get started, I want to reiterate some things that I talked about on Wednesday. I did not record Wednesday's session because we were just doing an exam review, but I do want to make sure everybody is up to date and knows what my expectations are. So let's first of all talk about what the schedule is, what the class or what's going to be happening, some dates that you need to be aware of. So this week we're going to be starting on our new chapters. And by the way, the new chapter content is going to be a lot more engaging. We're no more UML diagrams for the rest of the semester. Unless you take the final exam, then I can't promise there won't be UML diagrams. But for this next series of 5 chapters, no UML diagrams. Should be a lot interesting. I do say with a caveat that chapter 11 will be a little bit more rigorous because we're going to be talking about going into internal controls in depth. That's one class period I call the Red Bull day. It's like if you drink Red Bull, bring a Red Bull because you'll need to stay engaged. We do have our first AI project deliverable due. Just for a little bit of context, I've had some questions on this. This should not stress you out. You should not be like, oh, if I don't have a good deliverable, Dr. Barnes is going to ding me. Keep in mind that this is more of a personal interest project than it is for me, something that I'm going to be very rigorous about. I gave you some examples at the beginning of the semester. Like we had one young lady last year who did a question about how to improve haunted house displays using AI. That's the kind of thing that you can explore. If you personally have something fascinating, it doesn't necessarily have to relate to accounting or business. It just has to be use of AI to improve your user experience. So that's kind of what I'm looking for that. And it should be something that you find personally interesting, engaging, and fun. The people who are going to get the least out of it are going to say, well, I'm just going to do some boring technical topic that's easy to do. I'm not saying it necessarily needs to be technical. It shouldn't be easy either, though. It should be something that you do a little bit of work on with respect to that. But deliverables coming up here in a couple weeks, actually. 2 weeks from today is when the first deliverables due. Also, as a reminder, your professional interaction write-up, you do need to keep that in mind. It's in the schedule. The interaction write-up itself is not difficult, but you do need to attend an event to do the write-up on. We do have an executive residence coming up. I think that's in the next 2 weeks. I don't remember the exact date, but I'll get a date on that. There's also an event, a TrueBiz forum that's going to be taking place at the end of the month. Both of those are fine to attend for that particular event. If you have some other professional interaction that you've already attended, that's fine too. You can do your write-up on that. So yeah, and then right before Thanksgiving, we'll have our next exam, and that's basically what our next 5 weeks are going to look like. So I ask that you stick with me for 5 weeks. Give me good 5 weeks of time, and then week number 6 we'll do the exam, and then everybody will take a break. Uh, you will notice that we've got an open class on week 14. I think I've already mentioned this. Your AI deliverable is due on that date, but specifically speaking, I do not plan on having class that day. I'll leave that class open simply because the Friday before Thanksgiving, everybody's already checked out anyway, and we don't get a whole lot done. So that's going to be a bonus. Now, keep in mind that if something goes wrong, and I do think that we have to have class, I am going to change the schedule if necessary. I do not want to. I would love to have everybody have off that Friday, and so just be diligent to make sure that our efforts are strong for the next few weeks. A couple things that I want to reiterate in the syllabus that are note. First of all, please make sure. So I guess just preface this by saying we're in the second part of the semester. We're in the technically we're past the second half, but we're after the first exam. My expectations do go up after the second half, which means that my leniency for assignments being turned in late, my leniency for communication becomes a little bit less. Obviously, you can talk to me about anything, and if I think it's a legitimate issue, then we'll discuss it. But just oversights, I'm going to be a little bit less what's the word I'm looking for? Less sympathetic to them now, okay? Because we've already had 8 weeks of expectations being set, and so the expectations should be now well understood. So if you're not going to make it to class, please communicate this to me well before class, as soon as you possibly can. If you have an assignment that's due and you can't submit it in a timely, don't let me know after I've already gone through it in class. Let me know as soon as possible before the assignment is due. I can provide some leniency, but it will be less leniency in the past. Also, from a personal perspective, this came up actually at a conference I attended on Friday. So on my email, on emails to me, I do have some specific requirements in the syllabus. And if you go to the communication, say all emails are especially expected to be professionally written and presented. Now, have I enforced that very heavily this semester? The answer is no. Okay. A lot of people have sent me very, very sparsely worded emails. I've had a few people start the email out with, "Hey," my name is not Hey. Okay. Do I have a problem with that personally? No, it's not a real big deal. Communication to me is very informal. The reason I'm bringing this up is a horror story. Then this is anecdotal, but it comes from a very reliable sources. The department chair of Missouri State University's accounting program. She was telling a story about one of her top students that basically did not have a very strong professional agenda, did not have very good professional skills, had a job offer with a Big Four accounting firm, said something, we don't know what, because we were not privy to that information, but said something that was off kilter to a partner, got the job rescinded right then and there. And then the information about that student went out to all the other accounting firms, both Big Four and regional firms. This student apparently is now working for a small regional or small local firm in a small city because they could not get a job because of what they said. And I don't know what the context of it was, but I do want to reinforce that professionalism is really, really important. And even though I don't necessarily enforce professionalism, I do expect everybody to be really strong in that area. The good news is I've never really had too much of a problem with that with Truman students. I've not had any problems, at least definitely not to that degree. But it did reinforce an important point that you do need to take professionalism seriously, especially in your communications. So I may be reaching out to you if your emails are a little bit more informal in tone and say, please clean up the email. This is not a criticism. It's not going to be something that I'm going to that I'm doing to be rude or to be abrasive or because I believe I deserve that respect. But this is the one area of communication that I have specified in the syllabus that you need to be professional on. And this is going to reinforce that professionalism. If I were trying to be serious and legitimate, I would probably be professional in the classroom too, but that's just a bridge too far. Let's be honest. Okay. So I am going to reinforce that for the emails, and I'm just going to say the importance. I would feel terrible if anybody in this room got a job offer and then they said something that they shouldn't have said. And I said, I think to myself, I could have done a better job of making sure that student understood professionalism at a much better level. So yeah, I don't necessarily hold myself personally accountable, but I would do what I can to try and reinforce that. So that's going to be the one area we're gonna work on. We're gonna make sure that those communications are a little bit better shored up. If I reach out to you and say, please rewrite the email in a more professional manner, that's not me being a jerk. It's kind of me being a jerk, but it's more to reinforce that professionalism that I expect, at least in that area. Okay, so please don't take it personally. It's nothing that I'm trying to do for personal reasons. It's more to try to make sure that everybody understands what's expected of them at a professional level. All right, with that being said, we are starting back at the beginning of the book. I mentioned this before. This used to be chapter 10 in the old version of the book. They moved it to chapter 2. I really like the sequence the way it is. So that's why we're jumping around in the book. But this is a personal interest area of mine. We're going to be talking about data analytics for the next two chapters. So today we're going to talk about the basic theories behind data analytics, and we're going to talk about a model that's we're going to use for data analysis. But we're going to try to make sure we understand some of the core concepts with respect to data analysis. If you've had any classes in this area, then you may be already familiar with these concepts already, but this is going to be a good reinforcement tool. When we get to chapter 3, which will be our next chapter, we're going to apply this in the settings. So we'll be here on Monday and we'll actually walk through a Power BI example. So if you've used Power BI before, this is probably going to be something very simplistic and straightforward because we're going to do a very, very simple routine. If you've never used Power BI, you'll probably be impressed. It's something that consistently never ceases to amaze me. And we're going to talk about the underpinnings for Power BI and what it is capable of doing with respect to data analysis. So I do want to kind of start this out with the evils of data analysis. So data analysis can be very, very beneficial if used properly. It can be very detrimental if used improperly. Has anybody ever heard of the company Cambridge Analytica? It is a little bit before your time. This came to prominence back in 2015, 2016. Cambridge Analytica is a defunct British research firm, and I use the term research in quotations. Their supposed area was supposed to be research on social interactions. We'll talk about the problems of that here in just a second. But what one of their big projects is they were doing a series of data mining tasks in Facebook over social media. So has anybody ever done like a quiz, like a social media quiz, and basically filled it out and just kind of said, okay, the real popular ones that were really popular back in the 2010s, it's like, okay, can we guess your age based on your preferences or something like that? Those were very common. So if you've ever done one of those, you probably are fairly familiar with it. This was very similar in that vein. And they basically created this quiz. I believe it was called Your Life in Your Life in Data or something along those lines. I know I'm butchering it. It's not exactly like that. But Cambridge Analytica did this. This is your data life. That's what it was called. This is your data life. And like all of these quiz types things that are done through social media, it asks for your permission to be able to access your information. And what it told you is said by accepting to take this quiz, your Facebook profile will be accessed and we'll use information for your Facebook profile. What they didn't reveal is that by accepting this, the ability to take this quiz, not only did they get access to your profile, but anybody on your friends list as well. So think about it. If you got a Facebook account, and I know that Facebook is not real popular nowadays. Everybody's moved to Instagram because we're all visual learners. I'm still a boomer. The only social media I interact with is Facebook, really. I guess LinkedIn, kind of. But think about it. Facebook, how many people are social media? How many people you interact with? You probably have hundreds of people who follow you, and you follow several groups. Now imagine that one person on the followers list has basically done permission, and by doing that, they've given access to your account. Would you feel that that's a big privacy violation? Yeah. So for context, with this particular situation, there were 270,000 Facebook users who took this quiz. And by taking this quiz, Cambridge Analytica got access to 87 million personal data accounts. So that's how easily it spreads out. And there was a big uproar about this because, the vast majority of those people did not assign permission for Cambridge Analytica to use this. And the real big hoopla about this is 2015, 2016. There was a big event that occurred right there. That was when Obama left office and there was the election between Hillary Clinton and President Trump. And a lot of people attribute some of Trump's success to the social media campaign they ran during that period, which was in part inspired by some of the data found by Cambridge Analytica. They identified users who were going to be swing votes, and they kind of sent information that were influencing them. Now, did Cambridge Analytica affect the outcome of the election? I'm not going to go that far, but it did influence it to some degree. And that was one of the big criticisms that came out of that. And that was data that was, whether or not you agree with the use of that data, the fact that they were using data from accounts that were not authorized to do that, that was one of the problems they identified. So Cambridge Analytica got a little bit of a notorious reputation. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, they're no longer in business, so we can't actually learn from those lessons. But this comes from this idea that data can be very, very powerful when used, whether properly or improperly. Why? Because we have a lot of data. How many people have heard the term big data before? All right. This is big data right here. That's big data. Okay. I've run this joke now for 6 different semesters. I've gotten 0 laughs from it. Okay. All right. And I say that it's too corny, but I still put it in my slides. But seriously speaking, we talk about big data. Data is voluminous amounts of data that are generated every day by people. And if you think about it, we do leave a pretty obvious data footprint because we have a lot of data that we leave, whether intentionally or unintentionally. This did not exist as much to the same degree 50 years ago because we didn't have the same level of computerized connectivity. But now we're almost constantly connected to networks that can capture information. Now, how much of a data trail do you leave? It depends on what your level of paranoia is. That same professor that I was talking about at Missouri State, she tends to believe that every single thing that we say and do is captured by our phones and is being captured in some repository somewhere. I don't think that paranoia level is quite high. I doubt that there's somebody who's capturing every single word I say and storing it somewhere. And if it is, God help them, okay? Because I say a lot of ridiculous things. But I do think that there's data that is being captured for other purposes. For example, because I carry this phone around, it tracks my movements. It knows where I'm going on every single day, and it can actually develop routines from that. I found this out. I bought a new car back in April of last year. It's actually March of last year. This year, March of spring, or it's March of 2025. That's what I'm trying to get to. And it had a heads up display. It actually shows my iPhone maps. And when I got in the car and started it up, it showed the map and it said 5 minutes to Truman State University. I said, how did I know I was going to Truman State University? It's because this friggin' phone has been tracking my activity for years now and has been showing that I have a pretty consistent routine Monday through Friday. I go from my house, which is the north of town, side of town, to the mid part of town, Truman State. And then, of course, about 5 p.m. when I leave campus, it says 5 minutes to home. And it's like, okay, it's got my routine down. Fortunately for me, that's about the excitement that I go to. I don't bounce around a whole lot, so I can't really predict my other routines. My entire life is going from Truman back to home. Okay, that's pretty much it right there. So it's not really hard to figure out. But it is a pretty interesting series of data points, and a lot of prediction can be made from that. So big data is characterized by something called 5V. Now, I do want to make a note of this because this will come up. If you look in the book actually refers to this as 4V, which is an outdated terminology. There's actually 5V. So for the exam, you'll be responsible for all 5Vs, even though you won't be tested on or questioned on for one of these that's in the book. So what are the 5Vs? Okay. Well, it's going to be huge volume. There's a lot of data out there and it's constantly being added to. Okay. A lot of data, a lot of data. High velocity, the speed at which data is communicated has changed pretty significantly. It used to be very, very slow. Now it gets transmitted very, very quickly, especially with that connectivity. We know that we're constantly connected to networks that we can transmit information by transmit data, I should say. I will clarify that here in just a second. And then high variety. There's a lot of different types of data that's being out there. Not even just the different types of data that's being communicated, but the different structures of data that's being communicated. So we tend to think of data as being very, very specific in format. We say, all right, my name is a piece of data. My birth date is a piece of data. How about a sound clip? Could that be a piece of data? Like what I'm talking about right now, is this data? Yeah, this is data that you're using to process the informational terms. What about an image, a picture of this classroom? Could that be used as data terminology? Like if I took a picture of you all right now, like I said, yeah, so we could actually determine how many Truman students are enrolled in this class. I could use a picture to actually answer that question. So there's a lot of variety of data types, not just the data itself. Also, there's this thing called veracity, and there's low veracity. Has anybody heard the term veracity before? Yeah, honestly, I hadn't either before I heard of the 5Vs. So veracity is just a fancy term for accuracy. And basically, this is the one offsetter. This is the low accuracy or low veracity for data. Now, you may be surprised by this, but data itself can be woefully inaccurate. Has anybody ever gone online and found conflicting details about what's going on online, saying that somebody's doing something, and then you find another news account saying they're doing something completely opposite of that? I'm going to tell you this, and this may shatter your world, but the internet can be unreliable at times. Okay, the internet can be unreliable at times. It's if anybody's ever watched the TV show Peacemaker, like the main character tends to believe everything he Googles, and so that's just kind of one of those things that we all kind of take as normal. Says, yeah, I know the internet's unreliable. Talk about it, so you don't need to tell me that. Some people believe everything they read, so there are the people who are kind of like that. So We have to make sure we understand that not everything can be taken at face value. We have to be skeptical about that. And then high value. This is the one that's not identified in the textbook, but it is extremely relevant. Data in itself is probably not got a lot of value, but it can be transformed into something very high value, which is information. We already talked about data, the difference between data and information, which is why I corrected myself a little bit earlier. Data in its raw form is going to be something that we can transform into something very, very relevant and high value. So there's going to be something that we need to be aware of, is that data does have some inherent value. Now, this does reach an interesting point. So if we talk about the nature of data and high value, can we actually characterize that value in quantitative terms? Is that something that we're used to doing? So think about this. In your financial accounting class, do you have data as an asset on the balance sheet? No, it's not an asset on the balance sheet, but we are still saying it's got value. So how do we actually to determine what it is? Well, we don't know what the actual value is. We don't have to define value, which is problematic for quantitative terms. But a lot of organizations have determined that data is going to have some inherent value. And so it's something that we're going to safeguard and safekeep. So it's a little bit hard to actually determine what the value is, but we do know it has value and it's very significant for many organizations. Now, McKinsey Global Institute did try to assign a piece of information in this. They estimated that it could generate up to $15.4 trillion in value per year in just a subset of industries. Okay, now these are the largest industries that are going to be impacted, but it's still a pretty large number. For context, global GDP is roughly $100 trillion. So we're talking about 15% of global GDP can be generated just through data analytics alone. Now, I do want to put this in context. When I taught this course in the past on the earlier version of the book, this number was $3 trillion. This has gone up by a multiple of 5 in just a period of 4 years. So data analysis is a very real thing, and it's the thing that a lot of people have identified as being a very core piece of value for many organizations, so much so that we think it could be a very prominent area. And if you think about it, what type of industry or what type of business could we be in where we could actually generate something that's got 15% of global GDP? Like if you were in that business line, you'd probably be a very significant business within the scope of context of the world. So yeah, $15.4 trillion is just an absolutely colossal number, an absolutely enormous number. So if we're going to get on that, we need to understand the fundamentals of data analysis. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of data analytics. Now, in order for organizations to extract value from big data, they need to be able to transform it to use something of use and value. Now, we've already talked about this. Data is kind of the raw element, and it gets transformed into information. And information is where the real value comes from. But the information transformation to data doesn't just happen, okay? It's not like you can just throw data into an oven, put it on 475 for 20 minutes, and then come out, and then you go turkey dinner, okay? It's not the way that works. We do need to understand what is the process of transforming data into information. I also want to throw my caveat out here. So this happens a lot when I'm talking, because I try to get my stream of consciousness thoughts. I will at least once, and I've already done it once today, I will at least once, if not multiple times, use the term information when I mean data. All right. Now, we'll try to correct myself when that's the case, but please make sure you understand the difference. Data is the raw and untransformed input. Information is the output. Now, can information be data for other sources? Absolutely. It can actually be transformed multiple times, but for the most part, we are trying to keep those separate. Now, data analytics is the science of examining raw data, removing excess noise, and organizing the data with the purpose of drawing conclusions for decision making. Now, we understand the idea of raw data. Raw data is the untransformed input, and to be honest, it's usually a lot less clean than what we've looked at before. Does everybody remember the Excel assignments we've done in this class? That is core data, but it is not necessarily raw data, as I did do a lot of preparation and put it into a certain format that I expect you to work with. There's this idea of removing excess noise and organizing data. And what do we mean by noise? Is that actually referring to sound? No, it's referring to anything that prevents us from being able to present the data and be able to extract value from the data. So how many people, let's go ahead and ask a quick poll, okay? I'm gonna ask you, okay? I'm going to give you a data set, but I can give it to you in one of two ways. I can give it to you in an Excel file, or I can give it to you in a in a PDF file. How many people are going to ask for the Excel file? Okay, how many people are going to ask for the PDF file? Okay. I saw most Hands Excel file, and you're absolutely right. It's a lot easier format to work with. Has anybody ever tried to import a PDF file into Excel? I've done it. It's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. It's one of those things that's not meant for transformation purposes, and it creates a lot of problems with this idea of noise because it imports information that's not relevant to the decision that you're trying to make. It's not imports information or detail that's not relevant to transformation of information. Now, the good news is modern analytics tools do a lot of them do have much more effective methods of importing information and detail from these PDF files that Excel does not have. You trying to import anything into Excel or import anything in our formats in Excel, unless it's very specifically formatted, Excel is very notorious for not accepting imports. But other tools do accept that. Like the one that I use in auditing is called IDEA. It's a computer assisted auditing tool that actually has availability. Power BI does have some ability to import from PDF files, as does Alteryx. So we do have some access there, but the whole goal is the same, is to eliminate that excess noise, eliminate that excess detail that we do not want for our purposes of data analysis. And then obviously for data analysis, we want to be able to draw conclusions and make decisions with the eventual information that we're going to generate. And that comes up with this idea of being able to query the data. Now, how many people have heard that term before, query? Okay. You've heard the word before, but query is basically just asking a question of the data. So we're going to talk about what it is that we're going to do to be able to ask questions. And it would be great if we could ask any type of question that we want, but that's not necessarily true. We do need to understand the basis of the data first. So while data analytics can be an exhaustive process, it can generally be categorized into two steps. And these are the two that you will need to understand and know. All right. So the first step is called extract, transform, and load. It's called, its shorthand is ETL. All right. And it is just as it sounds. So where we extract the data from its source, we transform it into a format that we can use it for analysis, and then we load it into a platform for analysis. The way that I used to refer to this is I used to call this cleaning and validation, data cleaning and validation. And it is a tedious process. So like I said, the spreadsheets that I provided you for in this class, they've been pretty sanitized and straightforward. But imagine that if you're taking data that's just naturally occurring, the process that you'd have to go through in order to be able to do the analysis. One of the things that I like to tell about, and I try not to too many anecdotal stories about my past, but I used to do manual journal entry analysis for KPMG. And we would load information into IDEA, which is the CAT platform I use in an auditing. And so part of that process is taking disparate data sets, so coming from an Oracle or SAP system and whatever the client provides to me, and then putting it into the IDEA platform. Now, it would be one of those things that I would love to say that it was just immediate. We just took it from the platform and we put it into IDEA and we were ready to go. But the simple truth is that was the majority of the time. Preparing the data to put it into an IDEA was the most timely step in the process. And you can kind of see down here, it says data analytics professionals estimate they spend between 50 and 90% of their time in the ETL process. Now, if you're really excited about the idea of possibly doing data analytics in your future, you do need to sober yourself with the understanding that at least half of your time, probably far more than that, is going to come into the preparation of the data for analysis. That is what this is telling you right here. And I would say this is pretty accurate. If I had a 40-hour project that I would be working on, I would estimate probably at least 30 hours of that would be working on data analysis and validation, or data cleaning and validation. So ETL, 50 to 90%, I'd say somewhere between halfway, 70 to 80% is probably the most accurate estimate of that based on my personal experience. The problem with that is this is not the fun part, okay? Now, maybe you're one of those people who really enjoys cleaning, and if you're like, okay, I'm really excited about this, Dr. Barnes, okay? I keep my house tidy and spick and span. It's like, okay, well, you're exactly the person that they're looking for. But the thing that people really want to be doing is the second step, and this is going to be process and analyze, all right? This is where we do those queries. This is where we look at the data and we say, what can I learn from this detail? What can I learn from this data? What can it tell me? So we dissect and study diverse business data to help the organizations make sound and timely business decisions. So some of this can be very, very straightforward. Like when I was working, I mentioned KPMG, we also worked with payroll and procurement data sets. And I would look at trends in the data and I'd say, all right, are people being paid on a timely manner? Are there any gaps in the payment system? Are there people who are getting payroll checks that are not in the payroll master file? very, very simple analysis, but very, very powerful analysis that can answer a lot of questions that the organization might want to be able to answer. So how do we go about that? Well, the simple truth is that we've got a model that we're going to use for this. We're going to work through this model. Now, this is a model developed by the book's author, Vern Richardson. It's called the AMPS model, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about the AMPS model when we get a little bit further on. But let's go ahead and talk really quickly about the business and accounting impacts of data analysis. So the business impacts include the enabling businesses to identify future opportunities and risks. We're actually going to look at examples of this when we do our own data analysis projects here in the next few weeks. Our next 2 weeks of Excel assignments are going to be doing data analysis exercises on preset data sets. Also allows us to affect internal processes, improving productivity, utilization, and growth. So as I said, for an example, a lot of data analysis tasks can be internal. They can look at operations and say, how can we improve our operations so we can improve our overall procedures within the organization? Now, accounting-wise, data analytics can be used to scan environment to identify potential risks and opportunities to the firm. So we already know about the nature of risks in an organization, and we also know about responses to risk, which we're going to delve into a lot more in depth in Chapter 11. But we want to be able to identify what are those risks and how can they affect the organization, both from a quantitative and qualitative perspective. And data analytics can help us do that. They can also reduce the time auditors must spend on gathering evidence, allowing them to focus on professional judgment and evaluating risks such as fraud. This is a personal interesting one to me because I'm also the auditing professor. So using data analysis to reduce the amount of time that I spent doing quantitative tasks means that I'm asking more critical questions. If we go back 50 years ago, what is it that you think auditors did in an organization? And the answer is it was very basic. They would look at a balance in a particular account and they would take documents that supported that balance. So say, for example, looking at accounts receivable balance, they would add together a whole bunch of invoices that made up the accounts receivable balance, and they would add it together to see if those match. That seems really, really tedious. How many people would want to be an accountant in that situation? If your task was basically sitting in front of a 10 key all day and typing in numbers, okay? Some people are like, data analysis, data entry, sign me up. Hopefully we're past the point where data entry sounds like an interesting prospect to us. But we've moved past that. We've got computerized tools that can do the analysis for us, can do those tasks for us. So now we're asking questions of, okay, the balance is wrong. What are the implications of that? So we're asking subjective questions instead of objective questions, which is kind of interesting. All right, AMPS model. This is the wrong type of AMP, okay? This is probably what you're thinking of right here. Again, this is pretty cool, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this right here. So there are 4 steps in the AMPS model, and they come up with AMPS. So A, ask a question. That's the queries that we're talking about. When we looked at the data, what types of questions can we derive from the data? Then we're going to be talking about mastering the data, which is going to be largely a part of that ETL process I talked before. Performing the analysis, that's the fun part. That's where we actually run our queries. And then we're going to share the story, which we're going to get into a little bit more depth in Chapter 3. All right, so step 1, ask the question. AMPS model starts with asking questions that can be addressed with data. So some examples would be, which product is most profitable at stores in Missouri? So you've got a database of sales, we'll say for Walmart in the state of Missouri. And you can look at regional data and come up with some trends depending on what you look at. So they may look at the Kirksville Walmart, says, this is bizarre. Kirksville Walmart has a much higher sales of cheeseburger ingredients than anybody else. I can't figure it out. Why is that the case? Everybody in this room knows the answer. It's because Dr. Barnes exists. Okay. So yeah, that might be an example of why we would be able to do that. We could define questions and then try to find answers to those questions. Also, why are costs increasing in the West but decreasing in the East? All right. We want to know what are the geographic trends that could be used to explain that. What is the probability that our audit client will go bankrupt or need to restate its financial statements? Bankruptcy risks are relevant in this day and age. It has been for a very long time now. We're actually going to be able to run a bankruptcy analysis here in a few weeks. I think it's in chapter 3, which would be next week, next Friday. We're going to do a bankruptcy analysis called an Altman Z-score, which is a predictive type of analysis that we can run for data analytics. Next is going to be mastering the data. Now, mastering the data largely is going to be about that ETL process we talked before. That's where we create a format for the data that we can use for analysis. But in order to do that, we have to be able to put it into the tool. We have to be able to clean it in order so we can actually do the analysis, and we need to validate the information. So what data are suitable for answering our questions? So data questions would be including data accessibility. Can we need the data, get the needed data to answer the question posed? So could I ask a question about how many students are taking AIS this semester? What was my example for that earlier? What was the data point? I said I took a picture. So If I did a manual count and say, okay, I've got 27 students in the classroom, that would be a way to do that. But is that something that I can put into a spreadsheet very easily? Could I put a picture of the students in the classroom into a spreadsheet and have the spreadsheet say 27? It's not something that Excel is currently designed to do. Maybe sometime in the future, maybe the AI tools will evolve and develop, but for right now, we're not there yet. Also, data reliability. Is the data clean? That's where we remove that noise in that process. And sometimes that can be really, really problematic. So what do we talk a little bit about field parameters or field settings? We said that field parameters should be a certain type. So if you've got a numeric field, which is one of those columns, you expect every item in that column to be a numeric field. What happens if you've had an alpha character in a numeric field? What does Excel do? Absolutely nothing. It won't warn you. It won't tell you anything. Now, other tools will say this is probably an error because this should not be a numeric, it should not be an alpha field type, it should be a numeric field type. But that's something that we would want to know, we'd want to clean up or we want to fix in order to be able to understand the data. What about the data integrity? Is the data accurate, valid, and consistent over time? So this is a really important one. If we cannot rely on our data, then we cannot, the data itself is not telling us the information what the detail that we need, then we probably can't use that for analysis. Also, the data type, is it structured, is it internal, are there privacy concerns with the data? A lot of questions that come up, especially in this day and age with the sharing of data. Not only is the data going to be something that we need to be reliable, but can we put it into the format that we want? And if so, are we violating anybody's personal privacy by using the data in that particular context? So that's one of the things that we're going to talk a little bit about with AI tools. One of the things that I have to be very, very careful about doing AI analysis is not putting personal information into AI analysis, because some of these AI tools, they do store information. And so it might be very, very awkward if I start putting grade information into AI and that all of a sudden that information became public. So you have to be very, very careful on analysis when you're doing this. Make sure that you're not violating any of those criteria. Third step, it's going to be about mastering the data. Okay, we talked about this a little bit already, but if I had the choice of using getting an export into a data set into Excel versus a PDF file, I'm always going to default to Excel. Excel is a very easy readable format, and it does provide a lot more appeal for data analysis. But we talk about Acrobat Reader. Acrobat Reader for PDFs, it's a very, very valid point. In fact, a lot of organizations, they will default to that. They will tell you this is the only format that we can use, or put in the data, put the data in, which is really, really frustrating, especially if you're an organization that's focused on trying to minimize the amount of time that you're putting into mastering the data. This is why a lot of organizations have developed something called audit data standards. Now, I want you to make a note of this, okay? Because this always comes up in this course. These were standards that were created as a result of external audit. This does not mean that they are used exclusively for external audit, okay? This is kind of the criteria we want for data cleaning, that we would say this is the level of detail we'd want for an external audit. Does that mean that we can't use them other areas? No, not at all. It means that we can use them in a number of different settings, but the audit data standards evolved as a result of external audits. So the idea was that we want to make sure that we define our data files and our fields to support business processes external audits. So if we ask for a file, we set parameters for acceptability from our clients. We say, we would like this to be an Excel file or Excel readable format. We want to make sure that this field is present and it's a numeric field. This field is present and it's an alpha field, so on and so forth. Very clear, very distinct definitions that provide a very, very clear pathway for clients to provide detail. Now, the simple truth is clients are still going to do their own thing, but if we have these standards and the clients meet these standards, it's going to make for a much easier transition into the future steps. All right, our third step is going to be performing the analysis, all right? This step is determining what type of analysis should be performed, and we've got 4 types of analysis here, all right? Now, don't worry too much about learning these right now. We will have a homework assignment where we'll talk about these, but we're going to have a lot of reiteration on this particular point because we're going to be doing each of these types of analysis in turn. So the first 2 are basically what I would say are going to be kind of current analysis of current data, and they start with the letter D. The first one is descriptive analysis. Descriptive analysis is just simply saying what happened. You look at the data and it tells you what's going on. So example of this, we just had an exam in this course. I took all the grades, I put them into a spreadsheet, I put them into a graph. I can say, all right, I know that this many students scored an A, this many students scored a B, so on and so forth. Very simple descriptive analysis. Generally, this is going to be one of our easier analysis because we're just asking a very basic question. Show me what happened. Now we can get into more detail on that, but for the most part, this is going to be a very basic analysis. The next question is going to be a diagnostic analysis. Why did something happen? All right, so now I'm going to harken back to managerial accounting, to your 221 class. Does everybody remember variance analysis? I know I've mentioned it in this class before, and everybody's kind of like, quit bringing that up, Dr. Barnes. This is a sore point for me. I'm sorry to cause traumatic experience, okay? But it's a very compelling example for what we're going to be talking about. So when you did variance analysis, you had to calculate those variances, okay? Everybody remember you calculate like 1,000 and then U, and then you said 1,000 F, and then you always you had the letters F or U in there, okay? You had to be very careful about usage because FU is not a nice thing to say to somebody. All right, but that usually gets a pretty big laugh, but that was really weird. It's like, oh yeah. All right, so yeah. So what was the whole point of that? What was the whole point? Is it just to put out a number and say this is favorable, this is unfavorable? Ultimately, it's good to identify that, but don't those lead to more questions? So if I look at a direct materials cost variance and it says $1,000 unfavorable, what other types of questions can I ask from that? I can ask, why was this variance unfavorable? What happened with the supplier that made us have to pay more for these materials in this particular situation? So we're more interested in why did something happen as opposed to what happened. It's a progressive iteration on our first question. Why did something happen? And the variances are a good example of that because we know if we see an unfavorable variance, we want to say, why did something cost more? Why did we use more materials? Why do we use more labor? Those are good examples that you have and you use practical examples in other courses. So those are the current analysis. Then we have our future analysis, which begins with the letter P. The first one is called a predictive analysis. Will it happen in the future? Will it happen in the future? So some of these can be very, very basic. Say, for example, trend analysis. Does anybody remember that from their accounting classes, their finance classes, trend analysis? So if I have a constant GD or gross profit ratio of 30% for the past 5 years, what do you think my gross profit ratio is going to be for the next year? Give you a hint. If for 30% for 5 years going forward, it's probably going to be 30%, okay? It's a very easy expectation. That's very, very, very easy to determine if we can look at 30% over a 5-year period. Can we have more complex iterations on this? Absolutely. Has anybody done linear regression in any of their classes before? Okay, depending on your feeling about statistics, you may have some trauma there too, okay? Now, regression is basically saying we're going to draw a line, but we're going to use multiple variables to do that. And if we actually know what the variables are, we can actually have an independent variable and our dependent variable, and our dependent variable will be mapped based on activity in the independent variable. But it's just drawing an expectation. So say that I change my sales price, what am I going to think is going to happen to my demand in the future? Very basic economics question, but something that you've probably done in your classes before. And then we have our last one, which is called a prescriptive analysis. Okay, a prescriptive analysis. This is a little bit of a further point beyond our predictive analysis. Based on what we think will happen, what should we do? Okay, so if we think that prices are going to go up for our goods, say that we've got our materials and we're creating cheeseburgers, okay, because that's always my default. We're creating cheeseburgers, and the price of goods or price of materials for a cheeseburger are going to go up, and we're in the market for selling cheeseburgers. What should we do to combat that? Should we raise our price? Should we increase promotion of it so that people are a little bit less sensitive to the prices? Should we decrease the amount of cheese that we put on a burger? The answer to that is no, by the way. Okay. Should we maybe make a little bit of variety so we could actually do something a little bit smaller so people can be less engaged? If somebody is like, I don't want to pay $5 for a cheeseburger, says, well, we've got this $2 cheeseburger. It's a little bit smaller, but just as tasty. So actually having responses to what we think will happen, if we can identify what we think is going to happen in the future. So all of these very relevant questions and things that we can look into. But that's going to be our step 3. And like I said, we're going to do all of these types of analysis, and we're going to have examples of these that we're going to be looking into. So step 4, share the story. Present the findings, and I have a typo here that says chapter 11. This should say chapter 3, okay? Because that's our next chapter. It used to be chapter 11, and I thought I corrected this, but this is chapter 3. So we're going to look at this more in chapter 3. How do we share the findings? we're going to do this from a visualization element. We're going to use Power BI to actually show how we can present findings. There's a lot of different ways, but we're going to talk a little bit about the methods that we can go about that. So this is to be continued, so hold off on that. Last thing I want to talk about before we go today is I want to talk a little bit about some cost considerations. All right. So is cost relevant to AIS? I hope so, because we asked a question. That was the very first question on the first exam. The first exam. It's like, okay, what do we have to consider? Statements on financial accounting concepts. Number 8, cost cannot exceed the benefit of providing accounting information. So cost considerations, data analysis are going to be very relevant here as well. All right. So first of all, we have to know that specialized personnel are going to be necessary to prepare and analyze the data. Now, that could be you. Now, what does that imply about your marketability? And when you leave here, I hope that every single person in this room is going to be saying, I deserve more than minimum wage. Because let's be honest, you probably do deserve more than minimum wage, okay? Unless minimum wage goes way up, unless the floor goes way up, which would be something to see. Most everybody here is going to demand a salary for higher than minimum wage, and you should, okay? But that also says that this is something that your organization, wherever you go to work, is going to have to consider that in hiring you, okay? Because your specialized skill set needs to match the benefit they need. Also, storage. Massive data requires massive storage platforms. So if we're going to store data, we need to have the technology available to do that. Now, we've managed to learn how to defer part of these costs in part. Nowadays, we've got these things called cloud platforms, cloud storage platforms. It actually has existed pretty much for your lifetime. Does anybody remember a time before the cloud? I remember a time before the cloud. It was a very, very clear sky. No, okay. That was a terrible joke. I apologize. No, the time before cloud, before we had offsite data storage. Now, what's the advantage of offsite data storage? The advantage of offsite data storage is you don't have to have these big mainframe machines that you can store data. You don't have to have your own data platform. You can pay a rental fee for it like you would like for rent or something like that. What's the problem with that? Well, there's additional problems when you talk about cloud storage. One of the foremost and one thing that's becoming really problematic is security and privacy. Okay. Privacy to an obvious degree, but what about security? Has cybersecurity become a problem in recent years? Yes, especially with the storage of offsite data centers. The protection of that detail is going to be really, really critical. And then also processing. The cost of technology processing can be required to perform data analysis can be enormous. How big are they? Well, we've been talking a lot about AI tools. And I want to encourage everybody to use AI analysis because I think it's important to be able to become acquainted with that and acclimated to it. But some of you may be saying, Dr. Barnes, I'm very concerned about the environmental risks. And you should be, because the environmental risks could be very, very paramount. They say that one Google AI query uses as much power as it would take to light a 40-watt bulb for 1 hour. All right. That's not an insubstantial amount of power. Now you may say that's very little amount. 40 watts is not that much, Dr. Barnes. It's true, but that's one query. How many of you have just run one query in Google AI or in your AI tool whenever I've asked you to do it? It's like, I do as minimal as possible, Dr. Barnes. I try to make sure. It's like, it's very, very difficult, especially if you're going to be thorough in your analysis and you're going to use these tools effectively to run just a single query. You may run 100 queries in a session. If you think about that, that's using a 40 light bulb and leaving it on for 100 straight hours. That's like 5 days in a row, okay? Yeah, 4 days in a row. Or a little bit over 4 days, okay? So we do have to be very, very considerate of that. Now, this is something that we have to be make sure that we're not abusing. This is one of those things that if you talk to anybody who's very knowledgeable in this area, they say, don't thank the AI tool, okay? It's first of all, it's not human, okay? It doesn't really have any feelings, so thanking it's going to be one of those things you don't need to do. But more importantly, that's an additional query. It will respond to you, which means you're basically burning another hour of that light bulb, okay? So be very, very conscientious about making sure that you're using these tools, understanding that the cost of these are not even just quantitative costs. Those are certainly important, but qualitative costs as well. All right, that does it. Homework due on Wednesday. We'll also start back on NetSuite. See you all then.